So ESSA, in terms of its accountability, requires indicators that can be broadly grouped into these 5 buckets. The first one is academic achievement as determined by proficiency on the annual state summative assessments, student growth, or another valid statewide indicator, academic indicator, that would be applicable for elementary and middle schools. It requires the accountability system under ESSA, requires the inclusion of graduation rate. It requires the 4-year adjusted cohort graduation rate and allows for the inclusion of an extended graduation rate. It requires a new indicator, again, for Connecticut, this is the new one, progress in achieving English language proficiency for English learners on the English language proficiency assessments. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a subsequent slide. But that is a required indicator under ESSA. And the last one is indicators around school quality or student success. And the law refers to a variety of different topics, including student engagement, educator engagement, access to and completion of advanced coursework, post-secondary readiness, school climate and safety, and any other indicator that the state chooses. So these are the sort of 5 broad buckets under which ESSA offers, requires its indicators. And the key point under ESSA is that substantial weight in this system has to be given to the first 4 indicators, i.e. achievement, growth, graduation, and progress toward English language proficiency for English learners. And in the aggregate, this has to be given much greater weight than the school quality or student success indicators. So I think that's, I want you to have that frame in terms of what are the key requirements under ESSA. As you all know, we in Connecticut launched our next generation accountability system with extensive feedback from a wide variety of stakeholders, and I'd like to give a special shout out to the CAPS Assessment and Accountability Group because that was one we consulted with repeatedly, and several superintendents were part of that group. But we launched what we would call a multiple measures system. And we launched it with really no new data collection. We used all the data that districts were already sending us and leveraged that and worked with the existing data to really make a rich dashboard of indicators available. As you know, our indicator is a 12-indicator system. And when we look at the indicators that we do have in the system, the weights we assign to them, and the ESSA requirements that I just laid out for you in the prior 2 slides, we feel that we're very well aligned with not just ESSA, but also our state law, which was amended a couple of years ago to account for a multiple indicator approach. So overall, we feel from that perspective that we're pretty well aligned. We have some work to do, but we're pretty well aligned to the ESSA requirements. And I should also mention that as other states are thinking about multiple measures approach that move them beyond test scores and graduation rates, and when a lot of pundits, for lack of a better word, are looking for models, we seem to be popping up. Our system actually seems to be popping up in more than one publication as a potential example that other states can look at. So I'm really appreciative of all the input we have received, because I can tell you that for every indicator in the system and every decision point in the system, I have some voice from the field that's in my ear making that point that we considered and made an adjustment and an improvement in our system. So again, thank you for your continued feedback.
And Ajit, can I just jump in and share with folks listening in and folks who might be looking at this slide deck or hearing this webinar later, this system, really led by Ajit and all of our stakeholders, has put us in a terrific spot in terms of developing our state plan. Because so much pre-work was done, we do have changes, and we're still tweaks we have to do, and we continue to be open to feedback regarding improvements as we go along. But it really does allow us to spend time on the other parts and the other flexibilities of ESSA, whereas I was as recently as yesterday at a national conference where we heard repeatedly from states they're working on that large, huge lift accountability system. So we think we're in a very good position. I thank you for your leadership on that, Ajit.
Thank you. Thank you. So how does the next generation accountability system work under ESSA? And again, I'm going to highlight a few pieces, not everything. But when it comes to indicator 1, which is our achievement indicator, we will be proposing to continue measuring proficiency through the subject-specific performance index approach. We've heard a lot from districts about how that approach, a more continuous approach that builds on the scale score, is a much better way of looking at overall performance than just the binary, are you proficient or are you not proficient, as was the case with NCLB. The new indicator that is going to actually populate this year is the growth on the Smarter Balanced assessments in ELA and mathematics. This is growth of the same student from one grade to the next. So this applies to students who are who finished grades 4 through 8, because we can look at their 3rd grade score and their 4th grade score, or their 4th to 5th, 5th to 6th, et cetera. That is indicator 2 in our system. And we've said that when we launched it last March, we said that that was coming, and it is still coming. We've just released the Smarter Balanced results for 15-16, and later this fall, we'll be coming out with the actual growth model and the growth results. The third bullet point on the slide refers to this tweak that we have to make with our system. This has to do with developing a growth model for our English language proficiency assessment, because of this ESSA requirement, which requires us to measure progress toward English language proficiency for our English learners and incorporate that result into the accountability system. We actually think this is a welcome improvement with ESSA, because prior to this, the English learner accountability system was on a separate track unto itself that sometimes got attention, sometimes didn't. I think what ESSA does is put the progress of English learners front and center by requiring their inclusion in the accountability system.
So it's really moving those outcomes, and that growth is really moving from a Title III
to a Title I.
To a Title I goal.
That's
and
correct.
It's important for people, anyone who's filled out an application knows that Title III is asked for AMAOs every year, and a district improvement plan, a school improvement plan. Now it's front and center, being inserted into Title I where it belongs, but also now it's part of a comprehensive system.
Yep. Another change that ESSA made, again, really resulting from ESEA flexibility, was to take a different look at recently arrived English learners. And this is something that Connecticut is already doing, and we availed of this flexibility through ESEA flexibility. But what ESSA did is it codified that now into law. For those of you that remember this from a year or two ago, this was the, quote, Florida exemption or flexibility that everybody wanted, and Connecticut received this flexibility, and now it's actually codified in ESSA as well. What it does is all English learners test in the first year. There's no exemption to the testing itself, but there is exemptions in terms of how you handle the test results. So you don't have to include those test results for recently arrived English learners for the achievement indicator for really 2 years. And it's only in the 3rd year where achievement, on this slide you'll see it's referred to as indicator 1, really comes into play. But in the 2nd year, we're able to look at growth from year 1 to year 2. So it really holds off inclusion of their scores toward the achievement indicator, which we think is a really good move overall.
And for how long do English learners count into that performance index?
Yeah, the Deputy Commissioner is referring to another provision which has to do with once an English learner exits the English learner designation, they can be counted back into the English learner group for achievement indicator 1. We used to do it for 2 years. ESSA allows us to consider doing it for up to 4 years.
For up to 4 years.
So that's
which makes a big difference, and I've certainly heard over the years of my career that people who work with English learners say, but when they finally get good, they're not in the subgroup anymore.
That's right. That's right. We used to be able to count those exited English learners for 2 years. ESSA allows us to even go up to 4 years. So that's something we're considering and looking to include. The other section when it comes to accountability has to do with school identification and support. As you know, we already identified our schools in categories 4 and 5 and have already begun offering supports to those schools across the state. We won't be identifying new schools anytime soon. The plan, again, tentatively is around December of 2018. That is still a topic of conversation with the U.S. Department of Ed, but that's kind of what it's looking like. So we won't be doing any new identifications for state support in categories 4 and 5. We will be identifying schools into categories 1, 2, and 3 sometime in January of 2016 when we roll out the results from 15-16 school year for accountability. We will be finishing up the identification for 1, 2, and 3, something we put on a pause this past year because we had just implemented the new assessment, so the feds actually gave us the ability to pause school categorizations. So that pause allowed us to hold off identifying 1, 2, and 3 till January.
So we're moving into another poll question here in which we're curious, what is your level of knowledge of Connecticut's next generation accountability system? As you can see here, we're just curious if you've never heard of it prior to this webinar, if you're just now starting to learn about it, whether you have a general understanding of the indicators in the system, or whether at this point you have a deep understanding of the indicators, their weights, and the overall system.
And Jennifer, while folks are weighing in on their responses, I do just want to point out that initially, we envisioned the people who would be most interested in this webinar series were superintendents, and we wanted to jump on early and start to share the education around what are the big changes under ESSA. But there was such a groundswell of interest, we didn't want people to think that anyone was excluded. And while this is called our Superintendents webinar series, that's our intended audience, we really do envision that anyone can have access to it. We also acquired a much larger platform. We were sort of hogtied for a while, for lack of a better word, by a 25-person webinar platform, but we now have one that goes up to how high, Jen?
100.
100. So far we have not pushed the limits of that on any of our webinars. So for those of you that are here, we appreciate it.
And the results just came in, and you'll see them on your screen, but, oh, actually, I have to hit publish the poll results. That might help for you. But when you see them come up, you'll see that we have 5% that have never heard of it prior to this, 16% that are just starting to learn, 42 that have a general understanding, and 11 that have a deep understanding. So we're happy that there's a good percentage that feel pretty comfortable with the system.
Great. Thank you, Jen. I just wanted to share one other piece of information. The Federal Department of Education put out regulations, as they often do, with components of new law to help operationalize that law. And in this instance, the feds put out regulations around accountability and assessment and data collection, the topics that we're discussing today. I just want you to know that we, the Department of Education, did comment on those accountability regulations, and there were many areas we felt where the regulations would have constricted our ability to do the creative things and the positive shifts we've made in the next generation system. So anytime we felt that the U.S. Department of Education was extending beyond what the law required into adding more rules that would really, in effect, complicate our world or undermine the positive shifts we've made, we made sure we commented on them, and they're publicly available on the federal government's regulations website. And there is a link in here as well, so when this PowerPoint is posted, you will be able to click on that link and actually view our pretty detailed response to the different topics.
And I do want to share that this has been an ongoing process. It's called proposed rulemaking, and it's always similar to our stakeholder engagement process. Regs go out, all kinds of people weigh in on it. The last set, or at least I believe the last set of regulations before there's a change in administration at the U.S. Department of Ed is on the component of Title I, which is called Supplement, Not Supplant. It's pretty dense. If you feel compelled to comment on that, we will have the link to Supplement, Not Supplant posted. I just checked, and it's not currently posted on our ESS webpage on our website, but we will have that done as soon as possible. I will tell you that I've sat in on webinars. There's 4 options for districts. We will absolutely visit this at a future date. However, there's a tremendous amount of conversation and controversy around the issue, and I want to make sure before we engage too deeply in it that we try to, we have a question into the feds to find out if there'll be a final decision made. They're telling us that they're hoping to have all the finalized regulations for the components they've done by the end of the year. We'll see if that's actually a reality, and if they've already made the regulations, we're certainly going to weigh in on them. They're due November 7th. If you feel compelled to do the same, please do so.
There's a couple of questions that I'll try to get in here. The first question is the lost links growth based on the overall or subsection? We don't have a firm answer on that. That is exactly what we're in the midst of in terms of looking at the data. We're exploring really all options, including the overall and the different subdomains within the assessment. So we will be in touch with Capel around those topics. There's another question that says, when you say that we don't need to include less than 24-month Ls, do you mean we don't submit their tests? No, that's not what I mean. When I say we don't include less than 24 months, I'm talking about recently arrived Ls only for those less than 24 months, not all Ls. That's one thing. And it's not that you don't submit their tests. Actually, all of those English learners are assessed. It's just that we include those Ls for growth in year 2 on the state summative assessment and achievement for not until year 3. So we really give 2 years of quote pass, say, when it comes to pass, when it comes to achievement. Also, we refer to it as indicator 1.
And Ajit, do we report on that data?
Yes,
but it doesn't go into the accountability
index. It doesn't go into the
index.
accountability
Right.
index and the SPI. There's also state law actually that supports this as well.
Okay. In the interest of time, I see your next slide is about assessments, and I don't think there's a lot of changes here, are there?
There isn't. So what you see on this slide is really the requirement within ESSA. This is identical to what was in NCLB in terms of the tested grades. ESSA also preserves several NCLB provisions like alignment to standards, technical quality, individual student reports, et cetera, things that you're used to seeing. ESSA also preserves universal participation of all students and student groups in the assessment and inclusion of participation rate in the accountability system with the same NCLB standard of not less than 95%. That is also maintained in ESSA. And I want to sort of share a few flexibilities that we have already availed of in Connecticut through ESEA flexibility. Like I said, ESSA didn't just drop from the sky, so these are some of the things that ESSA is now offering that we've actually already availed of. So let me share a few with you. One is the transition to a redesigned SAT as our high school assessment. As you know, we made that shift this past year to reduce testing time in grade 11, to use the state assessment for college admissions. We've also done an alignment study, and we know that a majority of the core standards have a strong or moderate match to this redesigned SAT. So that was an important shift for us as a state.
And we saw good participation in our 11th grade exam. Yeah?
Exactly. Good. Exactly. We were in the low 80s in Smarter Balance in 11th grade. We were over 94%. In the SAT, and we aren't yet final with those
right.
numbers. Those are preliminary numbers. We may even go a little higher. But.
So in regard to that, plus the equity where students that may not have been able to afford the SAT from a Saturday exam now have it during the school day.
Absolutely.
It appears we're moving in the right direction, judged by the feedback we've received, and certainly by the participation rate.
Absolutely. We have also utilized computer adaptive testing. As you know, with the Smarter Balance tests, we do utilize computer adaptive testing in both ELA and in mathematics. This has actually allowed for substantially shorter tests when compared to the CMT. Those are aligned to the new standards, and we know from a technical perspective that the reliability is as good or better across the achievement continuum. And we've also improved the efficiencies with our summative tests. There is a link to a document here that talks about the purposes of assessment. Again, when it's posted, you'll be able to see it. I don't really have the time to get into it now, but that document really tries to situate the role and the purpose of the summative assessment, the state summative assessment, and our commitment to keeping that footprint light and efficient and not doing more testing than we need to, because it's something we heard loud and clear from stakeholders about the length of testing, especially as it pertains to the summative. You know that we've shortened the summative assessment such that our ELA and math combined on average is less than 4 hours now in Smarter Balanced. And even with the SAT, it's less than 4 hours. Again, with the goal of giving more time for classroom teachers to do what they need to do and what they do best with their students. Ultimately, it's the standards and not the test, the summative test, that's guiding instruction.
And I do want to weigh in because, again, from my experience at the national level, visiting with folks from other states, Connecticut has one of the smallest testing times of any state in the union. There are plenty of states that have quarterly tests in every single subject area. These interim assessments are really quite extensive, and when we compare what we do here in Connecticut and what we do, our interims are they available, Ajit? They're available, and they're completely voluntary. If they're useful, those block assessments might be useful by teachers. There's also the extensive sort of mimicking the summative assessment. I think it's called comprehensive.
Yeah.
And those are available as well, but that's entirely voluntary.
Exactly, exactly. There are some other optional flexibilities that ESSA talks about that I just want to address briefly. Again, we can discuss some of these things at great length, but I just want to address them because you may hear or come across some of these things in the readings, and we want to be upfront about them. One is that the state may exempt 8th graders from a summative math exam if those students take a state-administered advanced math end-of-course exam. This really is applicable for states that have a advanced math end-of-course exam for 8th graders. Connecticut is not one of those states. Some states have a standardized, like an Algebra 1 end-of-course exam that some of their 8th graders might take. Connecticut is not one of those states, so that this one is particularly not applicable to us. There is another flexibility that talks about that the state may choose to allow districts to choose a nationally recognized high school academic assessment in place of the state assessment. And here again, we feel that Connecticut has availed of the flexibility by transitioning to the SAT in place of the Smarter Balanced. So at this point, we've heard from districts that we want stability. We don't want more change at this time. So that's what we're working towards. And our state law actually also requires one nationally recognized college readiness assessment as the state assessment for grade 11. So we have that as well that we are considering. The statute already allows a state to consider the use of computer adaptive tests. Like I said, we're already using computer adaptive tests. The statute also allows the state to consider the use of above and below grade level items. This is something we're looking at, but we're weighing sort of the pros and cons of this, but please know that ESSA still requires on-grade proficiency. And we always have the mind from the stakeholders about the length of testing time, so we feel that while it may on the face of it seem appealing to try to increase and include above and below grade items, we feel that there is a pretty wide spread of item difficulty within each grade band in the Smarter Balanced item bank, and the standard errors that we're seeing along the spectrum are very low compared to what we used to see as well with our legacy assessment. And we're sort of concerned that if we use off-grade items, we might actually end up lengthening the test. Yeah. So it's something that we know is there, and we're looking at it, but I just wanted to share some of our initial thinking at this point on that, and we'll continue to solicit input on those matters. There's another provision that allows the state to either administer the state summative through a single assessment or through multiple interim assessments during the course of a year. Now here again, what we've heard from stakeholders about the length of testing time, and this is not a simple decision, a simple option. It requires a lot of thought. There's a lot of complexity when doing something like this. And like I said before, our goal is to try to keep the state assessment footprint small and efficient and leave the flexibility of the interims that Ellen referenced more to the local level so that you can actually use them as best you need them to inform teaching and learning, more than the state trying to prescribe a particular time schedule for administration of some of this. In past efforts to try to do this, there's always the concern of this type of approach actually doing more to control local curriculum pacing than just an efficient summative. So this is something we're looking at, and we welcome your input, but just wanted to, again, share some of our thinking.
And I think that was the overwhelming thing we heard in the first year, and actually during the field test and then the first year, is length of testing. Length of testing is impacting our instruction, and so we've used that as a North Star in terms of trying to keep the testing time down. But again, if there's a way or reason that statewide interim assessments would be useful, I think we've had a lot of change in the last 5 years, and I don't know many people would want to switch statewide to an interim assessment system. It would mean retraining. It would mean a tremendous amount of change. But as public servants, we're here to serve superintendents, ultimately students, and everyone in between. And if that's an overwhelming feeling, then we respond to that. But at this point, we think we have our finger on the pulse. And so we're not moving. We're thinking the single summative assessment is the best approach at this time.
Exactly. There are a couple of questions. There's one about why not consider new, innovative, and more appropriate indicators now possible under ESSA, and any new measures could replace unneeded data points that are currently collected. We feel like we've put the best foot forward with our multiple measures assessment given the available data. We are by no means close to considering other alternatives or other better indicators that might get more to the heart of what it is that we want to get at, as long as it doesn't involve super new collections, unless we can eliminate some older collections that are not worthwhile. So
it's balance. I mean, we're really trying to balance. We're trying to utilize every bit of data we collect, often by regulation or by state law. We're collecting a tremendous amount of data. How can we purpose that? And yes, there may be more innovations which we're available to look at, but we're actually finding that nationally, for example, absenteeism rates and the impact that has on student achievement, we've already collected it, and we're finding that other states are now following. That does not mean we have the be-all and the end-all, but any new innovation would require new data collection. And I'd caution people that they need to consider additional data we'll be collecting from you. So we're not closed to that possibility, and this is a two-way process in terms of stakeholder engagement. So if you have an extensive idea or a lead in terms of this, we're available to look at it, and you can feel free to email either Ajit or myself. Jen, are our emails at the end?
They are.
Yeah, so feel free to email us with your ideas.
Absolutely, absolutely. Please don't hesitate to reach out to us. I think when we launched the next generation system, we were absolutely clear that there were other indicators that we wanted to pursue that we had to let go, and one of them has to do with civic engagement. That's something we definitely wanted to pursue, and another one was school climate that we wanted to pursue, but we didn't have the appropriate set without really increasing burden at this time.
And I do just want to point out that the last bullet on this slide about states may apply to participate in an innovative assessment and accountability pilot, there's no additional funding connected to this, which would make it in our current economic climate a huge challenge to be able to be doing innovation and assessment and accountability, given that there is no funds. And it isn't at a district level, it's really innovative assessment and accountability at the state level. Is that accurate? Or is there pilots within
there are
state?
Pilots, but again, this is one of those things that we're going to be watching, and we'll be learning from the states that are going to jump in and take on quite a big burden, I think, in terms of development. There's another question here about which Connecticut indicator aligns with indicator 5 from the federal perspective. There are actually multiple Connecticut indicators that could align with the federal expectation. There is the chronic absenteeism indicator for Connecticut, which is indicator 4. Our Connecticut's indicators 5 and 6 would align as well. Indicator 10 for Connecticut has to do with post-secondary entrance. That's something that could align as well. So there are many indicators within the Connecticut system that actually would align with the federal expectation. So that was the assessment portion of it. And last section is around data collection and reporting. Now, this is where the feds are requiring, as part of ESSA, new collections or new elements that these are not coming from the state.
But I do want to point out, reflect some of the most vulnerable students Absolutely. In Connecticut and groups that we really want to start to pay attention to. And it doesn't look like it's too heavy a lift because the data is available, but Absolutely. We will now be reporting that according to these student groups. Yep,
exactly. And as you'll notice here, homeless status is something you already tell us through PSIS, as you do for migrant status. The students in foster care, the conference that Ellen referred to, I was there as well, and in another session there were states talking about how they were going to get their districts to identify the students in foster care and report it to the state. In our case, we won't need to ask you to do that because we already have a partnership with the Department of Children and Families that tells us that information. So we will actually be using that information to disaggregate student achievement results and report that out to you and to the public. So that is a good thing.
Right. And on a side note, there is some foster care, there's an amendment that includes some foster care guidelines and some changes under Title I. That plan needs to be submitted to the federal government by December 10th. We'll be floating out guidelines at or around, foster care guidelines at or around Halloween. And so the timeline is incredibly short, but for the sake of transparency, I want you to know that you should be expecting some foster care guidelines, particularly related to does the student stay in their original school or move to their new foster care location, how to handle transportation, what to find is in the best interest of the child. We're working closely with DCF on that.
Thank you. The one new element, though, is bullet number 3, which is identification of a student with at least one parent in the armed forces. We have already communicated this to superintendents from a commissioner letter in June. It's been in our newsletter as well. Our plan is to start collecting this starting with the 17-18 school year. ESSA also requires inclusion of accountability results into our what they call report cards, which we're referring to the profile, which we refer to as our profile and performance reports or the strategic school profiles. And hopefully by the end of today, the 14-15 profile and performance reports will be on EdSite with those new accountability results, which you already have from last March. So we've caught up to this change as well. ESSA also requires that at least 95% of students be included in achievement calculations. And again, I think with the shift to the SAT and the increased participation, this really won't be too much of an issue for us because we've already hit the participation rate threshold.
And at this time, we're going to open it up to any more questions that you may have. I know we've been answering some as we've been going throughout. If I see any more that come up, I'll definitely share them with Ajit and Ellen. But we just want to share with you that our next webinar will be on Title I under ESSA, Improving the Academic Achievement of the Disadvantaged, and that's going to be held on Thursday, October 20th from 2 to 2:45. And then our fourth webinar will be on a Tuesday, November 15th, same time, 2 to 2:45. And on this one, we're going to be focusing on Titles 2 and 3, which is preparing, training, and recruiting high-quality teachers, principals, or other school leaders, as well as language instruction for our English learners and immigrant students.
Do we have any questions yet?
There was one other question that came about the SAT alignment that I referred to, and we will share a link to the alignment study that is available so that you can actually see the extent of alignment that is presented in that study.
Where would you want to, will you send that to
maybe
attendees or post that on the website?
Yeah, it's already available on our website, so it's just a matter of where to go get it.
Okay.
So if you go to the Performance Office page, it's already up there.
You can find it there. Okay.
Yeah, but we'll share it. What's the next question?
And we.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, there's a question. What are the opportunities for Connecticut to incorporate performance assessment and multiple locally generated measures rather than high-stakes standardized tests? And again, I think we addressed this a little bit in the innovation in the slide around some of the optional flexibilities. I think that the expectation under ESSA still is that even if you do multiple interims, they have to add up to a summative score. Mm-hmm. So they have to be ultimately standardized in some way so that you can actually add them up. And so it is something that's available in the statute that at this point we feel will actually increase more testing time and make more of local assessments, turn them into high-stakes assessments instead of just leaving them as low-stakes assessments that help you. So help teachers with teaching and learning. So we appreciate the input and we will consider it. Let me see. Is it? There's another question that says, is it valid to count a student multiple times in subgroups? ESSA actually requires that, where it requires the use and continued reporting of each and every subgroup, as was the case under NCLB. We are hoping to, and I think I said this in the prior webinar, hoping to make a strong case for the use of our high needs supergroup that we instituted with this accountability system, because it counts a student once and it includes many, many more students, English learners and students with disabilities, into accountability calculations. When if we did them by each individual subgroup, we would actually be leaving them out because at an individual school or district level, there might not be enough kids in that subgroup. So that is still something that's being considered.
We have time for one more. We're at time.
Okay. Well, yeah, I think last one is, why is the lunch subgroup not being reported at the student level? This is a long-standing issue. This has to do with federal USDA regulations that we are required to implement. So the only ones who can see those data are technically those who are involved with the food service, not
it's a matter of confidentiality.
It is, and I'll just say one thing, that we are looking over the long term, so over maybe the next 2 years or 3 years, maybe a little sooner, but definitely over two years, to transition away from using meal eligibility forms. That's for a whole other day and a whole other discussion, but that's something that we're really trying to do.
But we want to be really clear, that is a federal requirement, and for any time you can identify students, we take data privacy incredibly seriously, and I've certainly worked in districts where that was highly confidential information held by only a small number of people in a school district.
I think we're totally out of time.
Yes, we are.
So at this time, we just want to thank everyone for participating in today's webinar. Thank you for sending in your questions and your comments. The recording of this webinar is going to be posted in the 2 locations that we note on your screen, which is the Superintendent's Digest and also on the CT Core Standards website. Remember, if you have any questions, please email either Ellen or Ajit, and we look forward to our next webinar that's held on Thursday, October 20th. Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everyone.